Top stories. For the first time in 3 years, Ukrainian and Russian delegates meet face-to-face in Istanbul, agreeing only to a 1,000 prisoner exchange with no ceasefire. Despite pressure from Turkey and Trump, Kyiv demands an immediate end to the war, while Moscow seeks more talks. Over 250 Palestinians are killed in Gaza since Thursday as Israel intensifies airstrikes and prepares for a new ground offensive, local health officials say. President Trump wraps up his Middle East tour with no ceasefire deal, but warns of a deepening hunger crisis and calls for urgent aid deliveries. President Trump tears into the US Supreme Court after it blocks his migrant deportation plan, calling it a dangerous day for America. He accuses the justices of stopping him from carrying out his elected mandate. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran has received no written US offer on its nuclear program, despite President Trump claiming that they have. Abbas Araghchi posts on X to reject Trump's assertion, insisting there's been no direct or indirect communication in writing. Israeli airstrikes hit 2 Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen after missile attacks on Israel. Netanyahu warns more to come. The Houthis confirmed the strikes on Hodeida and Salif days after Tel Aviv accused them of using the ports for terrorist activities. Ousted ex-President Yoon Suk-yeol announces he's leaving the People Power Party as their candidate lags behind Liberal Lee Jae-myung ahead of the South Korean June vote. Yoon's exit adds fresh turmoil to the Conservative camp in a tight and rapidly shifting presidential race. Hundreds demand Prime Minister Baybaz ouster in Tripoli as 3 ministers resign and 1 security officer is killed in clashes outside his office. Despite the turmoil, Libya's state oil firm says oil and gas exports continue uninterrupted. North Korea's Kim Jong Un supervises Air Force drills and demands all military units escalate war preparations, according to state media. He inspects strike and anti-aircraft exercises, urging a breakthrough in combat readiness across the armed forces. Our top story today, the European Union is preparing a new package of sanctions to increase pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin over the war in Ukraine. Speaking ahead of a summit in Tirana, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the measures will target Nord Stream 1 and 2, Russia's shadow fleet, its financial sector, and include a lower oil price cap. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed that European nations are working in coordination with the United States on these sanctions. He said the measures will move forward if Russia continues to reject an unconditional ceasefire. Let's listen in to Macron's comments.
Aujourd'hui, ce qui reste d'actualité, c'est la seule proposition concrète qui a été faite, celle d'un cessez-le-feu inconditionnel. Nous continuons par ailleurs de préparer des nouvelles sanctions en coordination avec les États-Unis d'Amérique au cas où ceux-ci ne trouveraient pas une réponse positive.
The push for stronger action comes as Russia and Ukraine held their first direct peace talks in over 3 years, a meeting in Istanbul that lasted less than 2 hours. The two sides agreed to a massive prisoner exchange, 1,000 soldiers each, but failed to reach any agreement on a ceasefire. Let's listen in to what Ukrainian officials had to say.
Our first priority was people, and that's why we negotiated to free 1,000 people, and we reached to a conclusion, reach to an agreement to exchange 1,000 people. It is important achievement, and that once again shows that we are focused to finalize.
The fact that one of the results of today's discussion is a possible exchange of 1,000 against 1,000 persons is an excellent news, potentially excellent news for 1,000 probably families in Ukraine. And if only for that result, we had to go here guided by Allah.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Western allies to impose tougher sanctions if Moscow refuses to halt the fighting. NATO and UK leaders also criticised Putin for sending low-level delegations to the talks, calling it a sign he is not serious about peace. Ukraine's delegation said a temporary ceasefire is a first step towards peace, but the Kremlin has yet to agree to that condition. We move on now. President Donald Trump returned from the Middle East with a mix of bold moves, foreign policy risks, and a few surprises. In a major shift, Trump announced the US would drop sanctions against Syria, but later on in the week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio clarified the move starts with a temporary waiver. Permanent repeal would need Congress. Meanwhile, Trump failed to get Russian President Vladimir Putin to Istanbul for the Ukraine peace talks. Trump, who had teased attending himself, was left dangling. Talks ended without a breakthrough. Trump claims Putin is ready to negotiate, but also blames Ukraine's Zelensky for being too rigid. Trump, in an exclusive interview to Fox News, talked about Zelensky and said that he doesn't have the cards to win. He also warned that if no deal is made, the US will impose crushing sanctions on Moscow. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Well, I will. If I do, honestly, I will. If we're not going to make a deal, we're going to see whether or not this is Turkey time. You know, this is now we're talking Turkey, and we'll see what happens. That would be crushing for Russia because they're having a hard time now with the economy. I have a very good relationship with Putin. I think we'll make a deal. We have to get together, and I think we'll probably schedule it because I'm tired of having other people go and meet.
And on the trade end of the spectrum, Trump said India is ready to eliminate tariffs on US goods, but downplayed the urgency of a formal deal. Let's listen in to what he said.
Yeah, once, you know, they're one of the highest taxed or tariff nations in the world. They make it almost impossible to do business. Do you know that they're willing to cut 100% of their tariffs for the United States because of what I did? Is that deal coming soon? Yeah, that'll come soon.
Now, in a related development, the US Supreme Court has decided to keep in place its block on President Donald Trump's deportation of Venezuelan migrants under a 1798 wartime law called the Alien Enemies Act, citing lack of adequate legal process. In a brief unsigned opinion, the court sided with the American Civil Liberties Union, which argued that migrants were being removed without sufficient notice or the opportunity to challenge their deportation. The decision prompted a sharp reaction from President Trump, who took to social media to criticize the court's ruling. He called it a bad and dangerous day for America, claiming that the Supreme Court is blocking him from doing what he was elected to do. Trump argued that the ruling will make it harder to deport migrants who, he claims, have committed crimes. In a separate development, a federal judge expressed frustration at the Trump administration for failing to provide adequate details about its efforts to return a man who was wrongly deported to El Salvador. U.S. District Judge Paula Sinis said the government has not provided sufficient information from top officials on how it plans to comply with her order to facilitate the return of Kilmar Albrado Garcia. We're now joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, located in Vigan, the Philippines. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Jim. This spat between Donald Trump and the American legal system has been ongoing now, but how significant is this Supreme Court decision to uphold the blocks on under the Alien Enemies Act?
Thanks for having me, Thomas. Your summary was just excellent. I think you really covered all of the points. I've just had a chance to read the decision very, very quickly. It was a 7-2 decision, which was unsigned. and the dissenting justices were, of course, Thomas and Alito. In terms of its significance, the court has held the line by upholding the right of every American or every person in the United States to due process. And in response, of course, Trump and his supporters would say that he was elected to carry out his agenda and remove people from the United States who they label and smear as being gang members and terrorists. But the fact of the need for their right to due process is to determine whether they are guilty of crimes in the first place or whether they're innocent people. So the court, once again, has done its job by holding the line.
Jim, what have you thought of Donald Trump's ongoing battles with the courts of America, spiraling from the bottom courts all the way to the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court? I mean, there are 6 conservative judges on the Supreme Court right now out of a set 9 who hold the post for life, 3 of which have been appointed by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is seen to have disagreed with them and taken things into his own hands. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump disregarding the checks and balances of the American judiciary?
Well, again, that's an excellent question. And in my view, as a legal scholar, what Trump is trying to do is to try and transform the United States from being a rule of law country into being a country, of rule of man. He's trying to substitute himself and his own commands for that of the Constitution. And this is not what the founding fathers, what the authors of the Constitution, or, by the way, any other president up until the present time has had in mind. And so what Trump is trying to do is nothing less than to upend the rule of law, which is the very foundation of the United States itself.
Jim, we've seen this happen, particularly in regards to the issue of deportations, these judges blocking certain actions, but Trump still carries on anyway. We've seen the fact that Kilmar Albrado Garcia, the man who was wrongly deported to El Salvadorian prison, CCOT, they've told him to return this man who was wrongly deported. Yet the Trump administration has admitted its mistakes, but still won't facilitate the return of the man. How can a executive power that's supposed to be checked by the 2 other branches of the US government continue to bypass the other 2 branches?
Well, again, you're absolutely right. And the only thing one can say is what Trump is trying to do, what is very obvious by his tweets or his social media comments, is that he's trying to discredit the judiciary, trying to weaken the judicial branch, and trying to substitute himself a kind of a one-man dictatorial rule. And this is very dangerous. And, not to editorialize, but this is not in keeping with American governance for the past 250 years.
And Jim, this isn't normal, I take it, for a president to disregard a Supreme Court ruling like Donald Trump has been doing during this second tenure of his presidency.
Well, no, it's not. And again, looking forward, there's another case before the Supreme Court regarding Trump's very first executive order, which he signed, which basically terminates the right to birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And even though the Constitution is very, very clear, all persons born in the United States are United States citizens, and even though this case was reinforced in the 19th century by another Supreme Court decision, Trump is trying to upend 250 or 150 years of constitutional law.
Jim, obviously you're in the Philippines right now, but if I'm not wrong, you're originally from the United States.
That's correct.
The fact that Trump is undermining the judiciary in the US, how does that play with public opinion, do you think? Do you think that the American people see these deportations as a superior matter to the integrity and the checks and balance that the American system has in it? Or do you think that, is that what you think is more of a priority, that this promise of the biggest deportation effort in US history?
Well, again, I've written about this previously. As for what most Americans think, I'm not an expert on polls. I don't believe that this is popular, and I believe that over time, as more and more cases are coming out, like Kilmar, Abrego Garcia, and like the most recent case of the young child who was a U.S. citizen, was deported to Mexico with her entire family, and she was a cancer victim, and the deportation robbed her of the chance to get her medications. So as more and more Americans find out about these draconian measures and the effect that it's having to real human beings who are not, by the way, criminals and terrorists, as Pam Bondi of the Justice Department is wrongfully claiming, as more people are finding out that although they may be undocumented persons, they are not the kind of criminals that Trump is making them out to be. They're hardworking people who are just trying to get by.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. You are staying with us while we move over to the Middle East. Iran's foreign minister is pushing back on US President Donald Trump's claim that a new nuclear deal proposal has been formally submitted to Tehran. Speaking on local social media, Abbas Araghchi called the US messaging confusing and contradictory, saying Iran has received no written offer, neither directly nor indirectly. This comes after President Trump, speaking aboard Air Force One, said Washington had formally proposed a new agreement and urged Iran to move quickly. Araghchi stressed that Iran would never abandon its right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. He added that Iran remains committed to a deal if the US lifts sanctions and respects its rights. Trump has said he's open to a civilian nuclear program in Iran, but not a nuclear weapon, and has hinted that trade could be used as a tool to reach peace. We stay in the region. The Israeli military has said that it has launched extensive strikes in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours as part of the initial stages of a fresh offensive on the besieged Palestinian territory. Israel's army said in a statement that the strikes were part of the expansion of the battle in the Gaza Strip with the goal of achieving all the war's objectives, including the release of the abducted and the defeat of Hamas. According to reports, thousands of Palestinians have been ordered by Israeli forces to flee parts of northern Gaza as indiscriminate airstrikes kill at least 115 people in the territory since dawn on Friday, according to reports. The offensive, known as Operation Gideon's Chariots, comes as Israel faces pressure to lift a sweeping aid blockade in return for a US-Israeli hostage released by Hamas. United Nations aid chief Tom Fletcher has said that time should not be wasted on an alternative US-backed proposal to deliver aid to Gaza. He added that the UN has proven a plan and 160,000 pallets of relief are ready to enter the Palestinian enclave right now. Fletcher earlier this week had questioned whether Israel would act decisively to prevent genocide in Gaza. In a letter to Fletcher on Friday, Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, accused him of delivering a political sermon and weaponizing the word genocide against Israel. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has said that a lot of people are starving in Gaza, as a global hunger monitor reportedly warned that 500,000 people face starvation. He also gave comments on the Israeli Prime Minister, calling him an angry man who has fought hard and bravely. Here's what he said.
We're going to see what happens. I think a lot of good things are going to happen over the next month, and we're going to see. We have to help also out the Palestinians. You know, a lot of people are starving on Gaza, so we have to look at both sides. But we're going to do. I think I can say that Bibi, he's an angry man, and he should be because of October 7th. And he's been hurt badly by that, but in another way he's been sort of helped because I think he's fought hard and bravely.
We're now joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, once again to discuss this in more detail. Jim, thank you very much for joining us once again. We have seen a more intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip within the last couple of days. Some reports are saying 250 killed in the past 48 hours. How does this achieve Israel's objectives? They say that one of their top priorities is releasing the hostages, yet there's only been one hostage since resumed conflict in March. What are your thoughts on Israel's new intensified strategy in the Gaza Strip?
Well, you know, under the principles of international law, this flies in the face of everything that international humanitarian law stands for. So, well, the response by Israel after October 7th was justified. And of course, everyone would agree that the taking of the hostages was unjustified and was a criminal act. By this point, the continued bombing, and they seem to be killing about 100 people per day, and the number of civilians seem to be, disproportionately large. I don't think that this is achieving any of Israel's goals, and certainly not in Israel's best interests.
Yes, and there are a lot of people raising, and a lot of international actors raising their concerns about this blockade that's been held over the Gaza Strip for the past 2 months, not letting any aid into the enclave. Reports of starvation of over 500,000 people are at risk. What are your thoughts on the blockade that Israel has imposed for over 70 days now?
Well, the use of food, or the deprivation of food to a civilian population is just wrong. It's contrary to international humanitarian law, and I would argue that it constitutes a crime against humanity. It's barbarous, it's awful. Food needs to be allowed in immediately. There's no justification for what Israel is doing in this case.
What are your thoughts on Donald Trump now? He has continued his rhetoric about feeding the people of Gaza with this plan, this privately backed plan, but we've seemed to have stopped getting statements about words of a ceasefire. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of his recent interview, I guess it was with Bret Baier on Fox News. I didn't see the whole interview, but it seems to me that Trump is growing increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu. And I think he kind of hinted there in that interview that Bibi, as he calls him, that Netanyahu has no real interest in seeing this war brought to an end, because once it is, Netanyahu will be ousted from office. There's a huge faction in the Israel Knesset, their parliament, that is arguing against Netanyahu. And I believe that Netanyahu is trying to drag the conflict out. And I believe that Trump realizes this, and he's becoming increasingly frustrated.
Jim, the public sentiment against Israel is growing, especially over this aid blockade, and obviously one of the biggest allies of Israel is the United States. We've just seen Donald Trump conclude a tour of the region of the Middle East. He missed out Israel. Is this a sign that Donald Trump is souring on Benjamin Netanyahu's government?
I think it could be interpreted in that way. I think also Trump's main purpose for going to the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, was a financial one and a transactional one. And furthermore, I think that Trump wanted to get along as much as possible with his new friends in the Middle East, and probably not going to Israel served that purpose very well. But I agree. I think that Trump is increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. We stay in the region of the Middle East now. Israel has launched fresh airstrikes on Yemen's Red Sea ports of Hodeidah and Salif on Friday. Its latest move to crush the Houthi group's ability to fire missiles towards Israel. The Israeli military said it dropped over 30 munitions on Houthi targets in what's now its 8th strike on Yemen. Israel claims the ports were being used to transfer weapons and once again warned civilians to evacuate. The Houthi-run health ministry said at least one person was killed and 9 others were injured. Residents reported hearing loud explosions and seeing smoke rising over Hodeidah. Israel's leadership is now taking direct aim at the group's top figure, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and his Defense Minister Israel Katz, who have warned that Houthi leaders Abdul Malik al-Houthi could be the next militant killed, comparing him to Hamas's Sinwar and Hezbollah's Nasrallah. Senior Houthis officials Mohammed Ali al-Houthi dismissed the threats as illusions, accusing Israel of setting unrealistic goals to buy time. The Houthis, backed by Iran, are part of a wider alliance that includes Hamas and Hezbollah. Since the Gaza war began last October, the group has launched dozens of attacks towards Israel, most intercepted or falling short. Though the Houthis recently agreed to halt attacks on US ships, their strikes on Israel show no signs of stopping. Here's what the Defense Minister and Prime Minister said.
כמו שאמרנו, אם החות'ים ימשיכו לירות טילים לעבר מדינת ישראל, הם ייפגעו קשות ונפגע גם במנהיגים. כמו שעשינו לדף ולסינוארים בעזה, לנסראללה בביירות ולהניע בטהרן, כך נעשה גם לעבד אל-מאלכ אל-חות'י.
הטייסים שלנו עכשיו תקפו בהצלחה שוב 2 נמלי טרור של החות'ים. זה רק ההמשך, ויבוא המשך. אנחנו לא מוכנים לשבת בצד ולתת לחות'ים לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נפגע בהם הרבה יותר, כולל בהנהגה שלהם, כולל בכל התשתיות שמאפשרות להם לפגוע בנו.
We stay in the Indo-Pacific. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un has supervised Air Force drills, calling for a breakthrough in war preparation across the entire military. According to state media, Kim inspected airstrike and anti-aircraft combat exercises, underscoring the need for enhanced combat readiness. Footage aired on North Korean television showed a MiG-29 jet firing what analysts say resembled a Russian-made mid- to long-range air-to-air missile. This marks Kim's latest display of military activity, including missile tests and tank drills. Now staying in the region, South Korea's ousted former president Yoon Suk-yeol has said that he is leaving the Conservative People Power Party, according to his Facebook. The announcement comes as the PPP's presidential candidate is reportedly badly trialling Liberal Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung in the polls before the June 3rd snap election. According to a Gallup Korea poll released on Friday, some 29% supported the PPP presidential candidate, compared to the 51% for frontrunner, whose December surprise martial law and subsequent impeachment brought about the snap presidential election had been called by members to leave the party in an effort to muster more support from moderate voters who negatively view his actions. Un said in his post that he is leaving the People Power Party to fulfill his responsibility to protect the Free Republic of Korea and asked the readers to lend your support to PPP's Kim Moon-soo. Meanwhile, candidates Lee and Kim are set to face off in their first televised debate on Sunday. Now move over to the United States. In the ongoing Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial, pop singer Dawn Richard told a jury on Friday that she often saw the hip-hop mogul beating his then-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, who earlier testified that Combs physically and emotionally abused her throughout their 11-year relationship. Richard recounted an incident at Combs' Los Angeles home in 2009 when Combs beat Ventura and dragged her upstairs by the hair. Richard then said she heard breaking glass and screaming. Richard said Combs called her and others who witnessed the assault into the studio the next day, gave them flowers and said their careers would be harmed if they reported the incident. Combs has pleaded not guilty to 5 felony counts of racketeering, conspiracy and sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. Combs has been held since September in a Brooklyn jail when not in court. If convicted on all counts, he could face a minimum of 15 years in prison and life behind bars. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.